Have you ever wondered what really happens in the shadows of the most forgotten places? Those that, in theory, should bring us peace but hide dark and inexplicable stories? Get ready, because today's video will transport you to a world where apparitions and supernatural mystery are more real than we dare to believe. It sounds absurd, but there's something eerie that persists in certain churches, places where walls whisper secrets, and where a mysterious little girl may be waiting. Invisible, or maybe not. If you love exploring the unknown and discovering stories that defy reason, you're in the right place. Just a heads up. After hearing what we have to share, you might never look at these places the same way again. All around the world, there are stories that defy understanding, mysteries that seem to overflow beyond the limits of our perception. When we hear accounts of apparitions and unexplained events, logic begins to dissolve, leaving room for the supernatural. In such a setting, an apparition can change everything, overturning concepts and beliefs. It's as if the real world holds a hidden door to another plane, where the supernatural flows naturally and earthly rules dissipate. This is the universe we want to explore, where supernatural mystery is an invitation for those brave enough to face the unknown. For generations, stories of spirits, haunted churches, and encounters with the inexplicable have been whispered, keeping curiosity alive. Apparitions are the protagonists of these narratives and, simultaneously, their most challenging enigmas. Every detail told, every subtle description of a ghostly figure or a silent movement adds more pieces to this puzzle that never seems to be complete. There's something both intriguing and unsettling about knowing we may never fully understand or decipher these presences. It's also common for many of these tales to center around spaces that carry intense historical or spiritual weight, such as ancient haunted churches. These places, wrapped in a veil of supernatural mystery, become the perfect stage for encounters that defy logic. It is believed that, under certain conditions, the environment seems to allow the souls of those who have passed on to remain present in some way. The silence of the corridors echoes old stories, where any shadow can become an apparition that makes us question what's real. The presence of something unexplainable has a unique allure, especially for those who see the supernatural as a way to understand more about the mysteries of existence. Each apparition is a potential story, a narrative that opens doors to a world where logic does not reign supreme. When we listen to these accounts, it feels as though we're touching, if only briefly, something beyond our reach. Curiosity is sparked, theories multiply, and, in the end, we're left with more questions than answers. Most of the time, stories of apparitions and haunted churches are told with a dense, almost sacred energy, as if these experiences reveal fragments of a hidden realm. With each story heard, we come a little closer to a truth that seems to slip through our fingers. The line between reality and supernatural mystery becomes thinner and thinner. As though we are on the verge of crossing to the other side, truth is lost, but fascination remains. Tales of supernatural encounters invite us to open our minds, to imagine possibilities that break away from logic. Entering this universe of apparitions and haunted churches, we embark on a journey that goes far beyond entertainment. It's a plunge into our own capacity to believe, to fear, and to question the unknown. After all, maybe it's precisely the mystery that keeps us captivated, searching to understand a world where the supernatural seems to coexist side by side with reality. There are moments in life when, in the face of pain and uncertainty, the inexplicable emerges as a beacon of hope. When my father was diagnosed with cancer, it felt like the ground had disappeared beneath our feet. Yet, in that abyss, my mother found strength that went beyond common understanding. In her intense prayers, she connected with an unshakable faith, as if she could summon something greater, a supernatural mystery that defied predictions. For her, each prayer was a shield, a promise that this battle would not be in vain. As weeks passed, with moments of apparent despair and strength, my mother became more present in church, almost as if that sacred space gave her extra strength with each visit. She connected deeply with something that seemed to transcend the walls of the place. It was as if she was touching the supernatural. Along this path of faith, my father's healing unfolded in an inexplicable way, defying medical diagnoses and rekindling in us a quiet, powerful belief in the impossible. The healing came slowly, but with each improvement. We felt the supernatural mystery around those prayers and visits to the church, haunted by our deepest fears, materialize. When my father was finally discharged, there was something beyond relief in our hearts. There was a certainty that faith had moved the impossible. My mother, transformed by her experience, devoted herself even more to church services, believing that this invisible power, this apparition of hope, could be shared with others. What surprised everyone around us was how the transformation of our family seemed almost miraculous. Every detail, every prayer, carried the weight of a connection with something that many dare only imagine. My father's story spread through the community, turning our small church into a place that many came to see as a sanctuary. It was as if there, where prayers echoed between nearly supernatural walls, something beyond the understandable was always lurking, ready to act. In that setting, I realized that the power of the supernatural wasn't only in sightings of beings or strange encounters, but also in the invisible force that redefines our lives. For us, every detail of that recovery was a mark of something beyond the material reality, something that opened a portal to a world where inexplicable forces find room to act. Each prayer of my mother became an act of faith, filled with intentions that, for us, brought life and a new perspective. The experience transformed us, as though we had touched even fleetingly a supernatural mystery that inhabits both haunted churches and our deepest hopes. What my mother and family experienced became a story others heard in awe, and for us, the supernatural ceased to be something distant, gaining a palpable closeness. And so, that encounter with the mystery of healing echoes as a family legend, a story that reminds us that perhaps forces exist beyond our understanding. On a cold and silent night, I found myself in an empty church. With the lights merely hinting at shadows and shapes in the dark space, I expected the darkness to bring a certain comfort, but the environment was wrapped in a supernatural mystery that seemed to hover in the air. Suddenly, something caught my attention. A girl standing in the back, her long white dress stark against the dim light. Her presence, quiet and impenetrable, was both fascinating and terrifying. I was frozen, unable to look away from that apparition that seemed to emerge from another reality. With hesitant steps, I approached, but the heavy atmosphere warned me something was wrong. The girl, whose eyes never blinked, moved strangely, as though the very air around her was dense. Every step of mine echoed through the empty hall, and the figure seemed to glide smoothly, disappearing and reappearing in different parts of the church. That apparition defied any logical explanation, and I felt I was in a space where supernatural mystery held power over reason. It felt as though this encounter had been predestined, like an open portal to the unexplainable. As I got closer, I noticed her dress was old-fashioned, too large for her body, and seemed to carry the weight of bygone eras. She moved with a calmness that contradicted the intensity of the fear I felt. Her figure was fragile, but her empty gaze was hypnotic, almost impossible to look away from. Around her, the air felt cold, as though the church, haunted by this presence, was in another realm. Every second in the presence of that apparition made me question reality and what I knew about the supernatural. There was something in her movements that suggested a dance, an incomprehensible pattern that seemed to resonate with the church walls. I could hear distant whispers, sounds coming from nowhere, yet filling the space. That encounter was filled with a supernatural mystery unfolding as she moved. Suggesting a story lost in time, the environment was charged with an energy that seemed to pulse with its own life, as though the church were a witness and guardian of events far beyond understanding. Every moment, the feeling of being between the real world and the supernatural grew stronger. The girl stopped, and for a brief moment, our eyes met. I felt as if she were trying to communicate something urgent. However, the silence continued, filled only by the dense atmosphere and the uncertainty hanging in the air. That apparition wasn't just a vision. It was an experience touching something far beyond the ordinary, a depth of mystery words could not reach. When the girl vanished, I left the church feeling that this encounter had planted a seed of unease in my mind. It was as if, upon leaving, part of that supernatural mystery had ingrained itself in me, becoming an invisible mark. I spent days reliving every detail, every exchanged glance as though something was still about to happen. The church, now haunted in my memory, became the starting point for a journey where reality and the unexplainable met, leaving only one certainty. The supernatural had touched my life. On a deep summer night, I remember looking at the sky and sensing a different, almost primal presence hovering above us. It was a shadowed figure with long wings and contours difficult to discern. In our small village, where tales of supernatural mystery always echoed, they said that winged creatures like that were omens of something dark. I, still a child, was fascinated yet terrified by the idea that this apparition might hold a power beyond our understanding. The shadow danced between the clouds as if it were watching, observing me too. My grandmother always warned us about such winged figures, telling stories of people who had seen similar apparitions. She spoke with seriousness, her eyes fixed on some distant point, describing what the old folks called the wings of the night. For many, it was a sign that something bad was about to happen, a supernatural warning that somehow protected those who knew how to interpret it. I listened with a racing heart, feeling that it was part of a supernatural mystery that permeated our village, something both protective and terrifying that night. I felt a strange connection to the creature. It was as if its flight across the sky carried an enigmatic message. It seemed to appear and disappear on the horizon, leaving traces of a presence far beyond the physical. The winged shadow turned that night sky into a living canvas of uncertainties. Each of its movements made the air feel heavier, and with each second, my fascination grew, as did the sense that I was witnessing an apparition transcending the real. For me, that sight was a link to a world where the supernatural revealed itself. When I shared what I had seen with some friends, I realized they all had similar stories stored in their memories. It was as if that winged figure was a constant presence, appearing from time to those willing to look. Each interpreted the apparition differently, but we all felt an ancestral bond, as though the creature symbolized something greater. From that moment on, the night sky bore an invisible weight, reminding us of the thin line between the visible world and the supernatural. Even after so many years, the sighting of that winged figure remains etched in my mind. The apparition that summer night left invisible marks, turning the supernatural mystery into a constant in my life. Since then, whenever I look at the night sky, I feel that somewhere the wings of the night continue to fly, guarding secrets we may never fully understand. The experience became more than a memory. It's a reminder that the supernatural may always be near, just waiting to reveal itself. However, what remained from that night wasn't just fear or curiosity, but a deep sense that we are watched by something beyond our understanding. Perhaps the wings of the night are guardians of an ancient mystery, a presence lingering in the shadows, defying the boundaries of reality and imagination. And so, this encounter became a personal legend, a living memory that the supernatural isn't as distant as we'd like to believe. On a stormy night, the silence of the house was interrupted by soft, discreet footsteps coming from the living room. I thought one of my children had woken up from the sound of the rain, so I went to check. But as I entered, my eyes landed on something beyond explanation. A child stood there, face hidden in shadow, and my first reaction was to think it was one of my own. But as I approached, I realized that small figure was an apparition. The atmosphere turned icy, and supernatural mystery hung in the air like an almost tangible presence. I stood still for a few moments, trying to understand what was before me. The child didn't seem to see me, but her eyes held a disturbing emptiness. I felt I was in another time, in another reality, as though space itself had folded around that figure. The storm continued outside, but the real tempest was in the room where I tried to process that apparition's presence. Shadows danced around her, as if something larger and indescribable was unfolding in an invisible dimension. When I tried to speak, my voice came out weak, and the child slowly turned her face, revealing a lifeless expression but full of history. It was as if, at that moment, the supernatural world had opened a window into my home, allowing me to see something beyond time and space, I felt that this encounter wasn't by chance. The presence of that ghostly child carried a deep mystery, an unspoken message I could never fully decipher. With every second that passed, the intensity of the encounter grew, revealing more than I could comprehend. The spectral child continued to watch me without making a sound, while the storm outside seemed to intensify in sync with the rising tension in the room. Her empty gaze transmitted an anguish that somehow connected with the past. I sensed that this presence had ancient roots, perhaps linked to a suffering still wandering between the worlds of the living and the dead. In my heart, I knew that the apparition wasn't a threat, but a remnant of something that had never found peace. Minutes passed, though they felt like hours, until the child faded into the room's darkness, leaving me alone with an unexplainable emptiness. It was as if that brief vision had transformed something within me, creating space for the unknown. I couldn't shake off her face from my mind, nor the supernatural mystery her presence evoked. Somehow that encounter had touched reality, as if the universe had allowed me a glimpse of what exists beyond our comprehension. Since that night, every time a storm hits the house, I remember what I saw in the living room. The figure of the spectral child became part of my story, an apparition surfacing in memory as a reminder that the supernatural might be closer than we think. Every thunderclap brings a sense that the veil between worlds is about to break, and I wonder if someday that child will return to complete the message she left hanging in the air that night. In a rural town where time seemed to stand still, rumors began to spread of an unusual sighting. They spoke of a dark figure, resembling a gargoyle, appearing on the darkest nights, hovering above rooftops and watching the silent streets. It was a being suspended between reality and supernatural mystery, and its presence quickly revived old legends the elders would tell. They said this apparition was a curse upon the town, re-emerging to bring misfortune and tragedy. For some, the gargoyle's reappearance was an unmistakable sign that hard times were lurking. The stories about the gargoyle spread from person to person, with each telling adding new, more terrifying details. Some claimed it had red eyes capable of piercing the darkness. Others swore they heard its wings beating in the night's silence. Tension grew in the town, and many residents avoided going out after dark, fearing an encounter with that sinister presence. The gargoyle's apparition became the talk of the town, a supernatural mystery that no one could explain but everyone feared. The legends came to life again, shrouding the town in a blanket of unease. For those daring enough to investigate, the gargoyle sightings seemed to happen near places marked by old tragedies. It was as if the creature were connected to dark events, reappearing whenever human suffering left deep scars in the town's history. This pattern only fueled the mystery further, leading some to believe the gargoyle was a physical manifestation of a curse. Some even believed its appearance was an omen of something even more dreadful, a kind of shadow guardian drawn by human despair. One of the most chilling accounts came from a man who, while walking alone in the early morning, felt an overwhelming presence above him. Looking up, he saw the dark figure of the gargoyle. Watching him with a hollow, penetrating gaze, he described the moment as an encounter with the supernatural itself, a sensation of being transported to a reality where evil had form. From that day on, he avoided walking at night, recounting his experience as a warning to others. His story, like so many others, quickly spread through the town, amplifying the collective fear. As weeks passed, the gargoyle was seen more frequently, and residents began associating its appearance with a series of tragic events, unexplainable accidents, disappearances, and even the deaths of some farm animals. For many, there was no doubt that the creature carried an ancient curse, perhaps a guardian spirit fated to watch over dark events. The town became a grim setting, where the supernatural seemed to have found a home, transforming the streets into pathways to a world where mystery became real. The gargoyle legend became an unavoidable part of the town, an element haunting both the young and the old, though some tried to rationalize it, dismissing the phenomenon as superstition. Most residents resigned themselves to the idea that there was something unexplainable about the apparition. The supernatural mystery of the gargoyle, with its dark wings and unsettling presence, brought new meaning to the town, and so the inhabitants learned to coexist with it, hoping one day the mystery would resolve. or at least that the gargoyle would disappear forever. It was a typical afternoon when, on a college project, a group of architecture students decided to conduct field research near a cemetery. The choice of location wasn't exactly planned, but a series of coincidences led them there. As they settled into work, an unusual silence took over the surroundings, as though the very place was aware of their presence. Time seemed to slow down, and a heavy atmosphere enveloped them. Gradually, the students realized something beyond the grounds was present, a supernatural mystery lingering around the area and now around them. As they debated the project's details, soft, light footsteps began to emerge from between the trees. At first, they tried to ignore it, but the sound grew louder, seeming to come from all directions. One of the students, visibly uncomfortable, mentioned the stories of apparitions reported in that area. The reference to the supernatural wasn't welcomed by everyone, but in that moment, none could hide their growing unease. The sounds, inexplicably synced with their conversations, felt like a warning that they had crossed the line between the ordinary and the mysterious. As afternoon turned to night, shadows began moving among the headstones. Initially, they attributed the movements to light reflections or imagination, but over time, the phenomenon became undeniable. One of them claimed to have seen an indistinct figure among the trees, standing still and watching. Tension peaked, and they all agreed something strange was happening. It was as if the cemetery were manifesting its own consciousness, revealing a supernatural mystery that defied their logic and courage. Every movement brought a chill and a feeling that they were unwelcome there. Trying to stay calm, one of the students suggested they finish the work quickly to leave the place as soon as possible. But as they resumed, their flashlight beams began flickering, flashing irregularly. The once skeptical group began murmuring quiet prayers, and fear turned the project into a suspense scene. Each flicker of light coincided with a distant whisper, a faint voice that filled the air with an oppressive discomfort. That night unfolded like a sequence of unexplainable events, where the supernatural subtly but powerfully manifested. At the height of tension, a sudden cold wind swept through the cemetery, and one of the students claimed to have felt a cold hand touch his shoulder. The sensation was brief but left a deep mark on his mind and on the others, who witnessed his panicked reaction. Completely shaken, they decided to leave, temporarily abandoning the project. Each of them felt they had experienced something unique and indescribable, a supernatural mystery somehow tied to the cemetery. As they distanced themselves, relief washed over them. But they knew they would never forget that encounter. After that night, the group shared the experience as a warning to other classmates. To them, the cemetery wasn't just a place of eternal rest, but a portal to something beyond understanding. The shadows, sounds, and unexplainable touch became a vivid memory, a reminder that the supernatural may be waiting where we least expect it, just waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. And so, that unfinished project became a point of connection with a world-defying logic and, at the same time, awakening a mystery they might never solve. So, how far would you be willing to go to understand the supernatural? Stories like these make us hesitate and think, is the mystery only out there or also within us? Perhaps the world is full of invisible layers, and the supernatural is closer than we imagine, just waiting for a chance to be revealed. Now, I want to know, would you dare to visit one of these haunted churches or explore a place where the unexplainable has already left its mark? Share in the comments. And if you want to keep journeying into the unknown, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Let's explore the darkest and most unexplainable parts of the world together.